Welcome to the 15 Minutes with a Farmer podcast from Successful Farming, where quick conversations reveal big truths about agriculture and life. I'm your host, Lisa Faust-Prater. When most people think of farm legacies, they picture land. Today's guest, Jace Young, says the real legacy is opportunity. Hear how he's helping hundreds of farmers with structure and mindset so they can build a true legacy. Jace, thank you so much for joining me today on 15 Minutes with a Farmer.
Yep. Thank you very much for having me. I'm excited for the conversation.
Well, for any listeners who don't know your story, why don't you tell us a little bit about your background and your family's farm?
Yeah. So I grew up in a small town in Western Kansas town called Tribune. I grew up 15 miles north of town on our family farm and feed yard that my granddad started back in the 50s. So my granddad went through the dirty 30s, had a pretty tough life and upbringing there. But when he started the farm operation, it was kind of an interesting deal because he literally drove out to Denver, Colorado and did a handshake deal with a banker to get his first $15,000 loan and started building essentially this empire from there. And, worked at it for 50 plus years. And by the early 2000s, it was a $10 to $15 million operation with a 14,000 head feed yard, 5,000 acres of ground, a grain elevator facility, and an operation that the entire family was involved in. My dad started working cattle when he was 5. And built the feed yard. So I was a cattle guy growing up, and I had 2 uncles that managed all the farm ground, and then I had 2 aunts that worked in the office with my granddad and kind of managed all the back end operations, the grain facility, and that type of stuff. So it was definitely a family operation. And unfortunately, in the summer of 2005, the entire thing went belly up. All right. So very unfortunate time, but also too just a very real world experience time where I learned a lot about what happens when you don't have things squared away and how it impacts people and stuff like that. So I remember the day the farm went under, and my dad, I remember walking in and he just looked at me and said, "Hey, just so you know, everything's done. And unfortunately, we're having to shut everything down, and we're going to have to find something else to do." And so that time for me, I had no idea how to respond. Plus, I was also in high school too, so I was kind of worried about other things, and just the stupid stuff that you think is important at that age. And I didn't recognize the significance of what he said until probably the next year or two, when what followed was a farm sale. My parents getting kicked out of their house that they raised their family in for 30 years and having to pack up and move into a small house in town. My dad went from running a team of 15 employees on the feed yard, some of which had been with him for 25 years, been running the entire operation, to essentially driving the county trash truck. And not that that's a bad position or anything like that, but going from a place of leading a team to doing what you have to do in order to take care of your family, I'll always respect my dad for that. But the biggest struggle, though, too, was just seeing the identity crisis that my parents went through. Even for my mom, she sacrificed all the opportunities she could have had in her life and all the things she could have done to, go back to the family operation and support my dad. And same thing for my dad. He started working on the farm when he was 5, and it went under when he was 45. So 40 years of his life, he essentially has to walk away with nothing to show for it.
What does that do to you as a high school kid? And how did you pivot from there?
I'm so happy that it happened, Lisa. I'm so grateful that it happened because it completely changed my perspective on my life and what I wanted. Because my parents, watching them go through that, I realized in that moment that, hey, you can spend your entire life working for somebody else, essentially, which was my granddad, right? Mm-hmm. And thinking that you have a future there and things like that, and things are good, and realize you could have it all ripped away too, right? So I honestly think, I left following all that experience. I went and got my typical 4-year college degree that I don't use. And then I got into ag banking for 5 or 6 years. And going through ag banking was super important for my journey because growing up on the farm, I saw the struggles from an operational standpoint and just working with family and finances. There were so many collisions and arguments and resentment and all these things that I witnessed growing up there. But stepping into the bank, though, now I got to see the financial gaps and really the mistakes that my granddad was making because he didn't have clear numbers and he didn't understand really the risk that he was taking. And also, too, that the market environment had changed, right? He was still treating the operation and his decision-making like it was the 70s when cattle prices would only move 3 cents in a day versus what it was back in 2003, 04, 05, and just so much more volatility in the markets there. I left the banking industry in 2016. I don't think I would have had the courage to make that jump unless I was with my parents when they went through that experience of losing everything.
It's a real moment in a young person's life when you realize that, like, your parents are humans and they're not infallible.
Yep.
That's a hard day, you know,
Yep.
that's a hard day, but if you can learn something from it, boy, that'll carry you somewhere.
Big lesson that I learned from my dad there. And it's something that so many people deal with today in the ag industry, right? They're going back and making lifelong decisions based on the promise of what their parents are saying. My dad trusted for 40 years. My parents also had several hundred thousands of dollars that they had saved up over a 40-year period. That was kind of their retirement there, and all of it was frozen and everything when the bankruptcy happened. And so my dad literally got blindsided versus if my granddad would have told him what was going on 6 months earlier, because there were signals. But my dad, again, you don't argue with your dad. You trust him and that type of stuff there, and that they're going to, take care of you. They still had it ripped away. And so that was, again, another huge lesson for me, though, too, that I wanted to be in control of my future. My wife and I had nothing. We had 2 babies and $4,000 in our savings account. No game plan, right? So I struggled really bad for about 3 years. And I say struggle where we didn't know if we were going to be able to make the mortgage payment, trying to figure out my way and my path inside the ag industry, how I could help people. And I didn't launch Legacy Farmer till 2019. And then once I launched that, it's like everything took off from there.
Let's talk about Legacy Farmer and tell me what the word legacy means to you and how land ties into that and how it's maybe more than that.
Yeah, so it's going to be different to me than what it is for most people, right? So my granddad, legacy was the old traditional definition of legacy of passing on assets and wealth. And to me, the definition is completely different. To me, legacy is passing on opportunity. And some of that comes in the form of assets and things like that. But I have zero expectation for my kids to take over what I'm doing today. My legacy is going to be my ability to pass on that opportunity and give them their shot. But also, too, my legacy is a lot more around what they say about me after I'm gone versus what I leave behind from a material standpoint or anything like that.
I love that. One thing that I've seen in farmers that I've talked to is the question about when to share financials, when to talk numbers with your adult kids, right? And in some families, everything's on the table, very forthright, everyone's on the same page. And then in other families, like the adult children don't know what's happening until their parents die, and then they're blindsided, and then they fight with their siblings, and then things get really ugly.
And this goes back to making lifelong decisions in your 20s or 30s based on the promise of what you will have one day, right? And not actually seeing it on paper. Not having anything written out, not seeing what the assets are, not seeing what the profitability is of the operation as well either. If you move back to the operation and mom and dad are not upfront about this and willingly sharing this information, that's a massive red flag. The importance here is making sure that we're getting the information structured in the right way so we can start bringing our kids back into that conversation, showing them, laying all the cards out on the table, but also putting it in a format where we can start teaching them, training them how we look at the operation, what this information means, what it means to, 1, as a business owner, 2, what it means to your accountant for a tax planning purpose, 3, what it means to your banker in financing things as well. And that's what, we built out a software called Farmer Metrics. And that's ideally what the software was meant to do in the early days there, to get the kids involved, because so many operations, all the numbers and all the important information is where? Inside the father's head.
Yeah.
Right. He dies, all of a sudden, all this burden is now put onto these kids that are coming back, and they have no idea where to start.
You talk a lot about knowing your numbers and monthly tracking. Can you talk a little bit about that and why that's so important?
Yeah, so that's the standard that we have with all of our customers inside a Legacy Farmer. So when I was in the bank, right, bank regulations and most of the loan policies in these banks is that we require 1 balance sheet per year, 1 annual cash flow. The thing is, on that annual cash flow, most of the time farmers are filling it out the night before or in their truck before they walk into the bank, right? So they're not really thinking through, and they're treating their multi-million-dollar operation like a hobby. Right. Versus really giving it the level of respect that is demanded inside of today's economic environment with the risk that we're currently dealing with. Right. So inside of our software and everything, we break everything out on a monthly basis. It's a requirement and standard that we set with all of our customers that they're going in and looking at their numbers on a monthly basis. And I'm talking updating balance sheet and updating cash flow. If you're not updating the numbers on a monthly basis, you can't plan or react in the right way to changes that are inevitably happening from month to month, right? Like an unexpected repair expense for 200 grand or whatever. That's if I get that in June, that's going to drastically change my game plan going into the next rest of the year.
Yeah.
And the guys that aren't checking numbers, I'm sorry, they're going to go. I don't care how big their balance sheet is. They're going to continuously burn away equity every single year because they're not updating those numbers there. A lot of people have asked me over the years, like, what's it take to be in the top 1% of farmers in the country? After working with more than 500 over the past 6 years, 100% certain that it's as simple as balance sheet, cash flow projections, updated every single month, and that puts you in the top 1%. When I was working in the bank, I had these multi-million-dollar operations coming in, looking at buying a $2 million piece of ground, looking to me for business advice. It's a 24-year-old kid talking to a 50-year-old grown man who's been running his operation for 30 years and has built everything, and he's got to get approval from me. That's a massive red flag to me too, right? And so everything about our system is built in a way to where if they want to go buy a $2 million piece of ground, I want them to know what the bank's going to say before they ever walk in the door. And that changes the entire dynamic of that relationship and honestly puts all the power and leverage in that relationship in the hands of the farmer.
I'm just thinking of the stress load and how, we all know farming is just such an incredibly stressful occupation. But a lot of that is because of things that you can't control. You can't control the weather. You can't control the markets. But when you leave yourself blind in this situation, you're just giving yourself another thing that's out of your control, but you can control it.
Yeah. So we've had this conversation come up so many times over the years of running legacy farm. And when people come to me like, well, I'm in super scarcity mode and harvest is not looking great. And it honestly impacts how they operate as a business owner. It impacts how they lead their team, impacts how they make decisions, impacts more importantly, how they show up for their family and for themselves after that, And my answer is always the same. Guys, hey, go update the numbers right quick. Just go update the numbers. And time again, that has proven to be the one thing that they needed to drop the stress load. It's literally as simple as having a system to update your numbers and having the discipline to go and do it.
Yeah. And, even if the numbers aren't good, at least and you can make a plan. Just the unknown is the worst.
If you don't know where you're at, how are you going to build a game plan for where you want to go?
I would love if you could share for farmers out there listening who may be in that boat where they're like, I know I need to do something. I don't know. I don't have a good handle on my numbers. What is one thing that they can do to get themselves going in the right direction?
This is more of a mental challenge than it is a financial challenge. And so what I would encourage people to do that are in that situation is literally pull out a piece of paper and write at the top the cost of my inaction. And then go through and just make a list, right? All the consequences that are going to happen if I don't change these things business-wise. Okay, great. Now I want you to carry it into balance, which would be your marriage and your relationship with your kids. And then talk about all the implications there. And then I want you to carry it into you. And we're talking more from a body perspective and how you're treating your body, and a being perspective, meaning the stories that are running around in your head and consuming you all day long. And then talk about the consequences there. Right. And the thing is everybody's got business issues, right? The thing is, though, is they don't become real in your mind until you start attaching them to other areas of your life that are also impacted. So the business problems can be solved for the most part, right? Thing is, though, is once you solve all the business problems that essentially can be solved by money, one thing you're left with are the problems that money can't solve.
Absolutely.
So.
Absolutely. And, one thing that my husband and I have said to each other in difficult times is that, if you have a problem that can be solved by money, it's really not a problem.
It's not a problem. Yeah, absolutely. It's so true. It's so true too. And that's why for a lot of people too, the answer to their problems is not giving them another $500,000. Right, or refinancing those loans, because all we're doing then is treating the symptom, not solving the root problem, which the root problem is built in habits, how they think about business, lack of knowledge, lack of education, lack of just putting all the pieces of this puzzle together. And this too leads to another big reason why we have these generational operations that go under, because the parents that don't bring the kids in to the financial conversation early, they are robbing that child of development from employee mindset to business owner mindset. And they're completely two different things and ways of thinking about the business. It doesn't take much to go do a task, right? As an employee, you're just a task. But if you keep your son or daughter in that employee position until they're 50 or 60, and then you expect to dump a multi-million-dollar operation with all this risk, all this uncertainty, all this weight, all this pressure on them, they're not going to know how to handle that. And the operation is going to go under, right? Or it's going to go through a generation where they're just on defense, which I've seen this too. They're on defense just trying to protect it because they don't know how to build it. Well, that's up to the parents to decide on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, Jace, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me today. I know that your words are going to resonate with our listeners, and just such good advice for farmers. So thank you for your time today.
Yep. I appreciate the conversation and appreciate you inviting me on.
Thank you for listening. Open the latest issue of Successful Farming. Visit us online at agriculture.com and subscribe to 15 Minutes with a Farmer so you never miss a chance to connect with the people who feed, clothe, and fuel the world.